with the kind of key moment in this film, if we can try and switch off the blue lightning behind us, that moment of the sunflower revolution, the protest moment, and maybe just tell us a bit more about the URL that popped up on the screen, budget.g0v.tw, was a real thing. So please.
Yeah, so we like to say that we're not protesters, we're demonstrators. Protesters manufacture counterpower, and demonstrators manufacture alternate power. So G0V, starting 2012, is the systemic movement that look at all the government websites, which is something that gov.tw, and make better shadow government websites at something that G0v.tw. So just by changing O to a 0, you get into the shadow government that is built by open source civic technologists, and that always works in a way that is free of copyright, that the government is basically shamed into merging it back. And the best thing about such Gov0 experiments is that a lot of it actually came from the career public service. It is the actual section chiefs and so on participating in our hackathons pseudonymously, and only when they really saw that this is a better way that the public can see the budget, co-create a dictionary together, make better contact tracing systems during the pandemic, make better distribution systems of masks during the pandemic, and many other things, better way to collaboratively fact check and so on, the government can then say, okay, because it's free of copyright, let's just make a digital public infrastructure. And so this has been for the past 10 years, a lot of very active, what we call the social sector in Taiwan, has been able to very actively set the agenda for digital infrastructure in Taiwan. And so that Occupy movement was kind of the peak experience for all of us, because as many of you know, there was like many Occupy movements before 2014 in Taiwan, but very rare did it actually reach a place where the head of the parliament actually said, okay, it sounds very reasonable. After 3 weeks of nonviolent Occupy, there's 500,000 people on the street and many more online managed to agree on a very coherent set of policy demands. So, okay, I'll accept, and that's it, right? So it's one of very rare successful Occupy that's then institutionalized the kind of facilitation, the kind of crowdsourced agenda setting that we demonstrated and not protested, demonstrated during those 3 weeks. So that's your initial question, initial answer.
So we're going to paint that timeline a little bit to start us off. So the budget website came in 2012?
2012, that's correct.
And that was the Gov0 movement, as it was known, starting to organize outside of government.
So basically every 2 months, we will hold a physical hackathon, about 200 people or so. And we meet in the National Academy. So the idea is that we need to find places that are credibly neutral, that are above any party politics, any ministers and so on, like purely social sector place. And it just so happens that Taiwan has this idea of a National Academy that only reports to the president, and president doesn't have control over its research direction. And so we were able to just keep meeting there every 2 months for more than 10 years now.
And so 2012, these websites that have forked the government, I've heard you use that phrase.
Yeah, fork the government. Fork means, steering it in a different direction, right? And always with the hope to merge it back.
So demonstrate, not protest, and fork, not the government. And so we start there, 2012. So the momentum's kind of building. 2014 comes.
Yes.
And what triggered that moment?
So in 2014, the parliament was at the time trying to fast track through in 30 seconds a trade deal with Beijing, and that would open up a lot of the service industry, including the then very new 4G core infrastructure to the likes of Huawei and ZTE and so on. So the conversations that people here have almost 10 years after that, we had that in 2014. And so it's not just the telecom industry, but also publishing and basically all the service and trade. And so the Gov0 people helped to code up some tools that says, if you just enter your company's registration number or the name of your company, it shows exactly how the CSSTA, the Cross-Strait Service and Trade Agreement, affects you. And then you can join one of the 20 NGOs around the occupied parliament to talk about things from an environmental perspective, from a labor perspective, from a consumer protection perspective, from a cybersecurity perspective, however you want. And then every day we take this group selfie, this snapshot, because everything is live streamed, just like we're being live streamed now, and transcribed and translated and so on. So instead of it diverging over time, it actually converged day after day. We will read what people were able to agree roughly with each other. We call it rough consensus, to live with such a agreement the previous day, and what remains to be deliberated. So no matter how soon or how late you join, there are still some points to contribute to the deliberation.
So we're starting to build this kind of muscle of developing these things. 2014 comes and the trade bill, there's an attempt to rush through the trade bill, that triggers this protest moment. At this point, you're
Demonstration.
Demonstration.
Sorry,
Busted. and at this point, you're part of GovZero.
Yeah, so I started very, very early. I joined GovZero 2012. And at the time, I was working with Apple on Siri technology and with Oxford University Press on empowering the low-resource languages, such as its Zulu or the other languages, to crowdsource dictionaries so Siri can speak those languages. And so naturally, because in Taiwan, nowadays we have 20 national languages, 16 indigenous nations, 42 language variations. So not all of them have the same degree of support like traditional Mandarin when it comes to dictionary building. And so a lot of the early GovZero work is actually on forking the official dictionary to add in modern words, contemporary words, and so on. So that was my first projects in 2013 when I joined. And so in 2014, what's really interesting is that this kind of crowdsourcing, this kind of facilitative conversation and so on that we practiced over 2 years really found its place coupling with the dynamic facilitation, the open space technology, the nonviolence communicators, and so on, the face-to-face facilitative people. And so unlike many other Occupy, where the face-to-face facilitative people and the online communications people were really two different camps. During the 2014 Occupy, we kind of fused together. We all learned the art of face-to-face dynamic facilitation, and the facilitators all learned the art of online organization, basically. And so we became kind of the same people. So after that, there was a mayoral election at the end of 2014. And so all the mayors that did support, crowdsourced agenda setting, open government, civic participation, did get elected, sometime to their surprise, without preparing an inauguration speech. And all the mayoral candidates that did not support it did not get elected. And so the wind really shifted. And then it's then up to us, right, to determine what to do. Now we have mayors that run with open government as their platform, with participatory budgeting, with citizens initiatives, with reverse mentorship, but they also have no idea how to properly work with people. They just, have this pre-commitment. And so we, the reverse mentors, are the people who are under 35 years old, and each cabinet member at a time were kind of tasked with finding at least one person under 35 to mentor them in the art of this new communication style. And so I was 33 at the time, so I got recruited into the cabinet as a reverse mentor to Minister Jacqueline Tsai, who is in charge of regulation for the cyberspace, basically. And so we did a bunch of stuff together, UberX, Airbnb, crowdfunding, all the interesting things around 2015, using the V-Taiwan process that builds this kind of bridging sentiments across polarization. And so that's, long story short, after 2 years serving as the young reverse mentor, then I turned 35. I'm too old to be a young advisor, so I got promoted to a full cabinet minister.
Obviously, right. So we've gone career trajectory in 4 years, hacker to mentor to minister. So in that moment, well, let's bring it up to 2020 and sort of, for me, the kind of pinnacle of the story.
Okay, so 2020, what happened 2020?
What happened in 2020? Anyone?
No idea, right? It's a very uneventful year. Well, we started building and institutionalizing such relationship muscles, and within each and every ministry, we have a team called participatory team, and with participation officers or POs, and they were trained in the art of facilitation, of citizen engagement, of civic tech, and things like that. And all that relationship muscle, all that 30 or so ministries horizontal network really got into action in 2020 when we started setting up this daily system where people can call a hotline 1922 and ask to their heart's content what's really going on with this pandemic. So in Taiwan, we discovered that we need, for example, to ration out masks very quickly. I think it was February 2020 when we started having this open API that anybody can see with a civic tech tool. Actually, there's hundreds of such tools, how to navigate to your nearby pharmacy, how to get some rationed mask and things like that. There's some communication efforts. We crowdsourced very cute memes. There was a spoke dog, a Shiba Inu, very, very cute. And she would just put her paw to her mouth and say, you know, wear a mask to protect your face against your dirty, unwashed hands or something like that, which is, you know, completely circumvents this, you know, aerosol debate or whatever, right? It's just a very viral meme that people would link mask wearing to hand washing and so on. So then this broad listening is not broadcasting. This broad listening network really paid dividends. For example, not long after we started rationing our mask, there was a young boy, 10 years old, calling 1922, the hotline, saying, "You're rationing our mask in schools, that's great, but all I got was pink ones, which is not great. Or the other boys in my class has blue ones, like standard medical grade masks, but all I got was pink ones. I don't want to wear pink to school, I'll get bullied," or something like that. And so we need to handle that fast, because if we do not do that, if we just, you know, after this goes viral and the Minister of Education goes out and say bullying is bad, it actually makes it worse, right? So we need to handle this in 24 hours. And so all the participation officers huddled together. And so there was a great idea from the Ministry of Health and Welfare's participation officer, which we turned into action. The very next 2 p.m. press conference, everybody wore pink. And the health minister wore the pink mask and like looking very hip. And so basically, regardless of gender, everybody wore pink. And so the Instagram, Facebook, whatever avatars of all the trending brands all turned pink. And so the very next day when the boy comes to class, only he has the, you know, the most hip color, the most sought after color, right? And so that's the idea of humor over rumor, the idea that it's not debunking that fixes this polarization. It is pre-bunking. This is anticipating the energy that will go into polarization and shifting that energy in a kind of Aikido sort of way into something that's humorous, that goes viral.
And just to underline one more thing in this, the 3 design principles that I believe were publicly announced, right?
Yeah, it's called fast, fair, and fun, right? So the triple F, that was our counter-pandemic response, and it applies to everything, not just masks, but contact tracing, vaccination. We have a global, national vaccination scoreboard that, just like soccer games, you know, displays the score of each age bracket's preferences. And so, for example, people in the 70s, in their 60s, because they read some reports from Europe around AstraZeneca. They don't prefer AstraZeneca. They would say, we prefer Moderna, for example. And there are people in certain age brackets, like 30 years old or something. They really root for the local team, the homebrew, the Medigen. But there are people who swear Medigen is, you know, toxic, and they will only get BNT and whatever. So I got all 4 brands, just to make a point. But anyway, so the point is that we knew there's going to be a anti-vax polarization attack down the road. But instead of debunking that, we turned that energy into civic participation, basically my vaccine better than your vaccine, kind of friendly competition. And so because of that, Taiwan does not have an anti-vax political faction. Everybody got vaccinated, but still to this day, people would believe that only the one that they got works, the other ones are fake or something like that.
So I want to kind of pause and sort of shift the mood a little bit and into, because in a way it's easy to, well, it's not easy, it's a lot of hard work and hard yards underneath that, but it's easy to make this sound like a kind of exotic story here, like, and something that could only happen in Taiwan. And that is a question that's often asked when I tell some of this story. How do you respond to that? I have a bit of my response, but how do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of pandemic response, we're second to New Zealand, so obviously it's not just Taiwan. But I think, in more generally speaking, it does require, as I mentioned, the relationship muscles, right? It does require the public service trusting the citizens, because to give no trust is to get no trust. And so it does take somebody to trust the citizen first before some of the citizens trust back. But the trust level was really low in 2014. The approval rate to the administration back then was 9%. And so, like, anything the administration says at the time, automatically people would just say, you know, well, we'll have none of this. And then if you ask a random person on the street, like, whether you will get democratic agency, like nothing about you without you, or something like that, they were like, of course not, right? And so it did take a lot of time and institutionalization and hard work for the public service to start trusting bit by bit the citizens. And it does take technology, right? Technology that highlights the bridges instead of the polarization to show the public service that it does actually surface the signal, not just the voice. It actually saves you time instead of waste your time when you engage the public in this particular way. And so I think in Taiwan, what we have demonstrated is that it does take, you know, in 2018, it was still just 20% trust level. It took us like almost 8 years to reach like 60%, right? So my president, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, graduated with almost 70% trust level, all like pan-partisan, which is very good. But it's like every year we just dialed the trust from the government to the citizen way up, and then maybe 10% of citizens trust back a little bit.
So I just want to underline this because there is a sort of an instinct to sort of project onto Taiwan as this sort of deeply solidarity nation in the face of an oppressor. And
by this year, of course, yes.
By this year.
But not 10 years ago.
Yeah, and just to like refer to some of those numbers that you put out. So trust in government was at 9% in 2014.
Yeah, and 20 in 2018.
And we're this year in the UK we're on about 20%. To give you a sense of like, so we are actually double where they were at the beginning. On some, you may have different data. No, the latest OECD data was 20%. So we're starting at a slightly higher baseline, even with what's happened here. And then this point about kind of a sort of like a sense of a sort of singular nation. But you're saying 20 different languages. There is some deep polarization there, right? So we're not talking about.
Well, there's a lot of like. If you go to political rallies, for example, if you go to the ruling party's rally for presidential election, you will find that none of them are waving the national flag. They're all waving this green island flag or rainbow flag or something. And it's actually at the opposition party, the KMT, where they wave the national flag. So it's very divided in terms of even the English name of our country. They will give you very different answers. And so anyway, but all these did not prevent the depolarizing work because we both, on both sides, and now with TPP, we have 3 parties, none of which have majority in the parliament, but all 3 parties doubles down on the democratic process and open parliament and citizen participation and so on. So it becomes a race to the top. Once the career public service know that they have the social sector as the ally to just foster this kind of work, then the political parties, the ministers, the MPs, and so on, they can compete, of course, on even more transparency, even more accountability. But then the ideology stop being, you know, the stopping point to stop the people from, you know, participating meaningfully.
And so let's zoom out again a little bit to the underlying philosophy here, right? And this is the book Plurality, the only 20-odd copies that are in the UK at the moment are at the back of the room and have all been signed. Not that there's a massive sales plug going on here or anything, but but just give us so this isn't just about there's a story and there's actually an underlying philosophy, a mindset that you're now kind of working with Glenn and putting out into the world as an offer of something to step into.
Yeah, it's like 1 kilogram of distilled wisdom over the past 10 years of work. So plurality comes from my job description. So back in 2016, when I first became digital minister in the cabinet, there was no digital minister in Taiwan before. So I get to write my own job description. And so I wrote a poem really. It's very short, I'll just recite it here. It goes like this. When we see Internet of Things, let's make it an Internet of Beings. When we see virtual reality, let's make it a shared reality. When we see machine learning, let's make it collaborative learning. When we see user experience, let's make it about human experience. And whenever we hear that a singularity is near, let us always remember the plurality is here. So that's literally my job description. And so the idea, really simply put, is that singularity may be near and nearer. There's a new book that says Singularity is Nearer by Kurzweil. And so, but every time that we see a technological transformation, we can ask like whether this technology is in the service of the plurality, that is the diversity that collaborates around us, or whether it is a technocratic force that centralizes more power to, this flying spaghetti, Shoggoth, AGI, whatever, in the sky, right? So to every technological transformation, we can ask that question. And so in Taiwan, we've been consistently asking that question, like whether we're developing AI as assistive technologies like this, assistive technology, very transparent, and also that I can fix it when it has bias. It improves my dignity. It's not transmitting photons to the cloud and back to my retina with advertisement pop-ups or things like that, right? So the idea really is that AI should be assistive intelligence. It should not be technocratic. And plurality or collaborative diversity stems from the radical kind of conflict that Taiwan brings, like earthquakes. There's 3 failed earthquakes somewhere in Taiwan every day. But because that we anticipate that there's earthquakes out of this tectonic conflicts between the Eurasian and the Pacific plates, so we work on resilience, we work on the building codes, we work on the societal preparedness that turns this conflict into co-creation. So it's like harnessing the fire, the explosion, right? Like before, when we see fire on the ground, we put it out. But now we see fire on the ground and we drill it, knowing that there's energy underneath. And so the idea is to turn that conflict into co-creative energy. And there's a lot of ways that the digital technology can help the face-to-face, the in-person, the facilitative, the community sectors, the neighborhoods to make that happen. And so if we look at traditional Mandarin words for digital or shu wei, it actually also means plural, shu wei, like several, more than 1, digits like 10, right? So Minister of Digital Affairs is also Minister for Plurality, and this is where the philosophy stems from. It is digital in the service of collaborative diversity.
Lovely. And just to underline it, I mean, the metaphor of the Eurasian and the Pacific and the plates crashing into one another is pretty powerful, right? And in the book, and I relate to this very deeply. So in my work, I talk about 3 stories of the individual in society in this moment: the subject story, the consumer story, and the citizen story. The subject story, the right thing to do is do as you're told, because the God-given few know best. The consumer story, the right thing to do is to pursue self-interest, because that will add up to collective interest. The citizen story, get involved, because all of us are smarter than any of us, and that's how. And you draw on a analogous, like I suppose, seeing the same thing through a different lens. So maybe you could set out how you see the sort of that trio or a trio.
I'll just continue the story, right? The idea of the 2 tectonic plates bumping into each other is also the story of the tip of Taiwan, almost 4,000 meters high, Yushan, rising up to the sky half a centimeter every year because of these tectonic plates. And so in a sense, the citizen story says that if we have the capacity to face the conflicts and just entertain in our mind the plurality of viewpoints. I'm non-binary, which means that I don't see half of the people as closer to me and half of people necessarily farther away from me. So in 2016, in my HR form, in the gender field, I filed not applicable, and in the party field also not applicable. And so I do not have any political party affiliation, but in a sense I'm pan-partisan, that if there is a party that I feel that I really can't understand why would people feel this way, I would always think it's my problem, it's not their problem. So I should spend time on an ethnographic or just hanging out with them until I can really see things from their perspective. And so I think this actively seeking to balance different viewpoints and so on, that is also plurality, and that is the citizen story. Because if you participate as an active citizen, you're going to run into people who share some of the worldviews, but also vastly different in some of the other points of the worldviews. And the point here is not to build a bridge so that we can all cross to the other side. It's not that. It's to build a bridge so that we can meet a little bit in the middle to share some stories and then go back right to where we came from. And that bridge building, I think, is core to digital democracy.
I've heard you also talk about it not as kind of just sort of papering over the differences, but actually drawing the best of all these different views, right?
Yes. And when I say bridge building, I don't mean it in a metaphorical way. I mean it in a very technical way. If you have participated in community nodes on X.com, previously known as Twitter, then you probably know that the nodes that gets featured as a kind of context check to any viral posts that may be lopsided are the nodes that convinces people on both polarized sides. So if people on two very different ideologies both resonates with one node, then that node flows to the top. It is a very different way to sort information. Instead of just sorting by addictiveness or engagement, however you want to call it, it sorts by how much bridge-making potential it does. And this open source algorithm stems from something that I worked personally on in 2015, the Polis algorithm. The Polis algorithm basically asks people a very simple question, like for example on the UberX case. First, we map out the facts that instead of the very idealistic, abstract sharing economy, gig economy, extractive economy, whatever exploitative economy, instead of those abstract words, we just say, okay, nowadays in Taiwan there is an app that a person with driver's license but no professional driver's license can use to meet strangers on their way to work and pick them up and then charging them for it automatically. So this is the fact. And the insurance situation, the registration situation, the metering situation, the surge pricing, these are the facts. Now we map out the facts and then we ask just one simple question to everyone. How do you feel about it? And this is really the key because everybody is an expert in our own feelings. There is no judgment in terms of feelings. If people feel that UberX is not covering their rural areas very well, then they can say, I feel that the rural areas are not being covered well. And that's nobody can say that this feeling is right or wrong. It is just their feelings. And so instead of a reply button, there is no reply button. And so there's no flame wars. There is instead, I resonate or I don't resonate with this feeling. And so when you go to the Polis website, all you can say is, I resonate, I don't resonate. And then the next feeling comes, the next feeling comes. And at some point, you'll be prompted also to write your own feelings about the UberX thing. And so next to the interface, there is this visualization that shows the clusters, initially very much polarized. You can literally see in the four corners people who identify more with the taxi associations, people who identify more with the UberX app, startup, ecosystem, whatever, people who identify more with the transportation ministry and the rule of law or whatever, and the people who simply really don't care about all this, but they care about rural coverage very much, right? So all these are like valid, and the great thing about this is that this is not a vote, not even a straw poll. So if you have 5,000 people all joining, all voting the same, it doesn't increase the area of the cluster. It only counts as 1 point, because the idea is to surface to the top the bridge makers. First, the bridge makers that build bridges within clusters, and then the bridge makers that manage to build bridges across clusters. For example, there are a statement that says surge pricing is fine, but undercutting existing meters hurt the livelihood of the people who drive. So it can only go up and not go down. And that's a unifying sentiment across 2 islands. And so after 3 weeks of nonviolent communication, people literally see those clusters merging to the middle. And then we have like 10 like high consensus, 85% or more statements that we can then read as agenda to Uber, to Taxi Association on an open live stream multi-stakeholder meeting that says, okay, this sounds very reasonable. Would you like to commit to it? And once they all commit to it, it then becomes law. So since 2015, we've been have a more than 20 such laws and regulation passed this way, and more than 100 collaborative meetings from citizen initiatives and so on that also use Polis as a bridge-making algorithm.
And just to say, so I'm going to bring us back to the UK and invite people into conversation a little bit in a minute. This same process that like we've gone from sort of taking it, like transforming the government to like the nuts and bolts of developing a regulatory framework on Uber. The range of this is remarkable. But just to say, so Polis, pol.is, the website, is being used all over the world, and currently in Grimsby they're using it as part of their kind of an organisation called Our Future, using it as part of the kind of visioning of the future of that town. So some of these things are already happening here in a lot of ways. And I suppose that's where the conversation I want to sort of invite people into with one another and then hear some from, is really like, it feels to me, and I'm going to ask you to say one more word to this, it feels to me like now is a time when maybe we don't, I sometimes say like I don't think the new Labour government is Audrey Tang. I don't think they're going to sort of do it all and create it all. I think they might be able to be more like the Speaker of the Parliament in that moment of demonstration, not protest. When something was being shown and Speaker Wang sort of stepped into it. And so if that is the case, like what might we all want to be doing in that, I suppose, is the conversation I want to invite us into now. Not just what would we love to happen out there, but what might we want to be doing? What are we doing? And so I'd love to, in a moment, invite you to talk to one another and sort of just chew in that a little bit, and then we'll hear some questions or some soundings from that conversation, but also some questions if you have them. But just before we do that, like, your reflection on kind of what this moment might be in the UK. So you've been here a few days, sort of getting a feel for it. How would you see it?
I think it really is a time for demonstration, for demonstrators. There's a very clear energy in the air about let's just do something. In the first 100 days, we yesterday had a workshop with the hard art community, and there's just huge amount of energy there that says if we manage to build something from the social sector, from the impact communities and so on in the next 100 days, then there's a real chance that it gets institutionalized. And that is the kind of moment that we faced in 2014, in 2016, and we did institutionalize a lot of this stuff. And that then led to this, what we call people first public-private partnership, right? So PPP, that then defined Taiwanese politics for like the past 5 years. And so, yeah, I would encourage you to think as a demonstrator and with an eye on perhaps institutionalizing the stuff that you'll be doing in the next coming month.
Beautiful. So with that call to arms, I'm going to invite you to turn to one another again, maybe the person you met at the beginning of the session, maybe someone else, and just we'll give you like 5 minutes to chat and digest a little bit, and then we'll hear a few soundings, and then give Audrey a chance to respond. Go. All right, so far? How do we feel about coming back? I think there's a sense we can share a couple of soundings, can we? Let's do that. So let's I'd love to just hear, I mean, if you want to ask a question, please do. If you want to just share a bit of a flavour, we'll come down the front for the first one, if we may. I think there's a mic coming from behind you.
Well, there's 2 mics.
We're very well equipped. And then excuse me, can we go over here for the next
Hi, Audrey. I love you and I love all you do, but some critical questions, or one critical question, is about human energy and time to create the counter-spheres that you're talking about. Or counter-spheres that become new spheres of power for new relationships between the government and the people. There's a big discourse at the moment about social media and the way that it exhausts citizens or stops them becoming citizens by unraveling them, by addicting them, by distracting them. Now, to what extent are you availing yourself of all those techniques to some degree? And then to what extent do we have an agenda in the way that Linux put the operating system out to the world from a very resilient society, Finland? How do we have another job to do in terms of interfaces and behavior with the Web 2030 moment? And is that what you're building, is the interface citizenship as opposed to the operating system?
Great.
There's more microphones. I think there's really 2 questions here. First is that with the social media that we have built, it is possible for them to then back influence the antisocial forms of social media so that they have to become pro-social somehow. And I think that is a regulatory question. By a large degree, for example, Digital Market Act from the EU, they said that WhatsApp must not gatekeep its messages. I mean, they all use the Signal protocol anyway, but previously they were able to gate the conversations from within the WhatsApp. But now with the DMA, they now have to interoperate with other Signal protocol speaking instant messages. And so if you think about applying this principle, not just to instant messages or group chats, but to social media in general, then you get into a place where it's more like podcasts or more like email, right? You can use Gmail, I can use Proton, it doesn't really matter. We can still send email to each other. You can post your podcast on Spotify, I can listen it on iTunes or something. It doesn't really matter. So the posting content environment does not then control the algorithm of the viewing algorithm. But currently that's not the case, right? If you post on TikTok, then you can only view on TikTok. And so TikTok has the monopoly on the recommendation algorithm. And so even if we do know that there are bridge building algorithms, if we do know with rigorous study that this kind of curiosity, affinity, personal story, these things, they actually increase long-term engagement. Like it's actually good business, as opposed to the short-term addictive stuff. There really is no incentive for TikTok or any of those platforms to switch to the new algorithm. But if we somehow say, no, the underlying digital infrastructure, just like instant message, should be interoperable. And if you're not interoperable and you dial up some volumes and so on, and then you become liable for the harm, and then that creates a regulatory pressure for them to interoperate and essentially say, okay, now you bring your own recommendation algorithm, right? So I think that is a place that I very much want to go. And in Taiwan, we already passed a law which itself is crowdsourced. So that's the second part, is the social legitimacy part. Because if it's only the MPs asking TikTok to change, well, that is one thing. I mean, the US tried that and to some degree passed a law, right? But if you want to have it to cover also Google, YouTube, and Meta and some somewhat newer platforms, then you have to have legitimacy from the not just parents, but the entire communities. So in Taiwan, we actually did that. We sent 200,000 SMS to random numbers in Taiwan. and from 111, so people know it comes from the government. And with it, a survey that they file in, again, what do you feel about information integrity online in social media? And by and large, they care about this addictiveness that can lead to fraud, to people, defaking celebrities or things like that. And then out of those people who responded, we use random stratified sampling to choose a mini public of 450 people that we know that statistically represent the Taiwanese population. And so then those 450 people met online in 45 rooms of 10 people each. And the rooms are auto-facilitating. So they're AI, assistive intelligence, facilitating this conversation. And so the 10 people, they can talk about one particular topic. There's a group selfie that goes on, like a real-time transcript that shows the points of division, points of bridging, and if they decide to move on, they can vote to move on to the next topic. And then the AI facilitators with language models can do something that humans cannot, which is to bring snippets and fragments from across 45 rooms and to find synergies between them together, which is very difficult, right, for human facilitators. And then we create a laws that makes them liable for the damage of their viral algorithm does, first on the fraud issue, but soon on other issues as well. So that's the second part. You need to have a mini public or some sort of legitimacy-making device to make this regulation work.
So this.
A little bit like that, yes. So like radical participation. Yes.
And I think just to say, like, we've got the things like community notes emerging, which, again, the story of community notes in the books, there's some real, like, things are shifting already, which is a very different kind of narrative to that we usually have in this
There
space.
are pockets of good within those large social media companies. It was just there's no incentive for them to deploy their work more widely. So we need to create that incentive.
And they are shifting. Let's come over here. And I'd love to hear some of what you've been talking about as well. Don't feel you just have to quiz.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, John. This is slightly two-pronged, but we had a great conversation and reflected on the size of networks, at which point it starts to break down or it doesn't become accessible to others outside and to those within. Did you have any reflections on like certain tools that might make it more inclusive? And then the second point being, I also reflected as a South Korean, is there a level of social construct which is explicit to East Asian cultures, where participation and collective action is a bit easier, or the appetite is more, whereas Western cultures might be a little bit harder?
Do you want to just say a little bit more about your perspective on that? So would you say that is the case?
I want to say I don't want to shy away from it. My observations, immediate observations are yes, which is, I don't know, there's a part of me that wants to, there must be a way to bring people to get the better in an individualistic society, but feels very tough, or it feels like an uphill struggle at the moment. But
can you pass the mic down to this lady and we'll just hear from you as well? And then Indra, do you want to come in on this as well?
I just want to echo, because first of all, I'm very proud of Tang, because I'm from Taiwan. Before COVID,
Team Taiwan.
Yes. I've been here 28 years. Most of the time people say, Thailand? I say, no, Taiwan. So now they say, Taiwan. Oh, okay. So first of all, it's very proud. Second thing, I think I've been here 28 years, and I really, really see the difference between how I grew up here and now I live here. And I think, follow what the lady just said, I see the difference about collectivism and individualism. I think Confucianism really put us individual in the bottom of the chain. The nation is above everything. That's a very deep philosophical ground. I don't think people understand here. And I think the individualism here does really bring your democracy, your diversity, community efforts. So it's very difficult to pull together because we see so many problems and everyone wants to do locally. But Taiwan, I think, or in many Asian countries, that nationalism, you can forget about what you do. More important, we just get one common goal. And I don't know how we overcome that common goal. The second thing is regulation. Difficult, the barrier. There's so many rules. It's about GDPR, privacy issue. If anyone really here, when you look at COVID, when someone say you're out on the same flight and you are 200 kilometers away, you have to go be quarantined. People will be freaking out here because, oh my God, Big Brother, how do you know? Where did I go? But in that part of the world, it's okay because for the bigger national good. Okay. So I don't know these two barriers. How do we overcome through your experience?
I'm going to come in on this as well, but let's take one more from the floor, from Indra, and then we'll come to Audrey, and then I might chip in as well.
So I think I'm in a slightly different position because I'm half Dutch, half Indonesian, which means that I have the colonized and the colonizing genes in my formation. But my instinct, having had one side Muslim, one side Catholic, I became a Buddhist. Right, and I think that there is a spiritual aspect to this which we might need to emphasize more because interestingly, I find living in the West as I do, that there's an appetite for going beyond the old into a new spiritual reality, and the desire to overcome old ways of being is definitely present here. There's no question of that. However, my question politically is, for us, and I'm saying this to John as well, this question, do the current politics, can either side possibly represent this new possibility? I have my doubts because they're built on opposition to the other and actually to some extent even hatred of the other. There's a real visceral loathing. And so it's very hard to really imagine a neutral space unless it comes from society itself. And that has to be very brave to really include all the people we're currently excluding. Okay,
Audrey. So it feels like this conversation, I mean, often it comes up, this sort of, how can we really do this here? Feels like people are nodding at me. So let's spend a few minutes in this. Audrey, your reflections, and then we'll see where we go.
So Taiwan is the second most religiously diverse place next to Singapore. So we do have Confucianism, folk religion. We do have Taoism. My father's parents, my grandparents are Catholics. I'm, of course, a Taoist. And there's many strands of spirituality that we observe that really brings people together in a way that's not quite nationalist, that is not quite about patriotism, that's not quite about defending the country, but just about enjoying this spiritual neighborhood, for lack of a better term. Maybe it's not called community building, but the result is community building. In Taiwan, even during the martial law era, even before we have the freedom to form political parties or to form a press or something, already there are like Buddhist endeavors like Tzu Chi and so on that already gained very high social legitimacy simply by providing a spiritual place for people's energy to go into. And so, and they don't threaten immediately the dictator, so the dictator lets them be, right? And so what I've observed is that within the technological spheres, especially if it's coming from Silicon Valley, then one of the most marginalized group within that community is actually deeply religious people. You don't find many deeply religious people among the technologists in that particular community. But in here or in Taiwan or in other places of the world, we don't see that very strict separation between people who practice spirituality and people who practice technology. In Taiwan, I think even as time goes on, there's more and more people practicing spirituality, and the higher educated people practice like even more, which is an interesting trend. So I think this is a conversation that we can like intentionally shift, like in terms of diversity and inclusion. Maybe for the tech community, for civic tech, we can say we need to diversify and include more spiritual people. And that will turn the DIA conversation kind of 90 degrees. And then that has the potential to build this horizontal connection. So it's not scaling up, it's not scaling out. It's more about scaling deeply. And that may offer some answer into expanding the network size that is outside of our immediate neighborhood, but rather into a more kind of spiritual neighborhood. And so, I mean, the book is first and foremost endorsed by Dalai Lama, His Holiness. And we just sent some copies to the Holy See because the Pope also wanted to read it. And so I think there is something to be said about the spiritual and interfaith traditions and how that may offer a spiritual link between the different tech/democracy ideas. And that may actually overcome some of the partisan hatred as well.
I think I might come in just on this thing about here and individual versus... where I'm inclined to invite you to remember back to is COVID here, actually, and that moment when, at the very beginning, actually, we saw street WhatsApp groups, mutual aid groups. Do you remember the NHS First Responder Scheme, where it was set up for 250,000 people to apply in 3 weeks, and 750,000 signed up in 36 hours? Like, there is that reaction. One of the ways I would argue it is that we are all citizens by nature, into the language of subject, consumer, citizen. Like that. The challenge is, what stories do we surround ourselves with, and what narratives kind of land on that? And I think what we saw in that moment was I would argue, as a sort of surge of intent and will, but only in Taiwan, actually, I think, was it really met by an openness. And so I think what I would encourage us to think is like, yes, it will look different, right? Like, it's not going to be the same everywhere in the world, but this idea of kind of starting to demonstrate, create the spaces where that story of ourselves, that idea of everyone as a contributor, everyone has something meaningful to offer, is endorsed and validated. That can be done here, and we can do that. It doesn't have to be done by government. I also happen to think there's a real moment of opportunity with this government that they might, but I think
there's really nothing wrong with like a jurisdiction of 10,000 people or 100,000 people. Not everything needs to be done in the 23 million people scale. I mean, all of the tools that we used during the Occupy, it came from Occupy Seattle, from the Lumio and Spiral folks in New Zealand, the participatory budget stuff from Decidim, that's Barcelona, and Madrid and Porto Alegre, of course, the citizen petition platform we adapted from Better Reykjavik. And so there are many smaller jurisdictions that just prototype those tools. And there's nothing wrong with that. It was just Taiwan got into this very opportune moment to deploy it to a scale that's 10 times more. But it doesn't mean that operating on a 1 million or 100,000 scale is worthless. It is actually very worthwhile to work at that scale.
And I think like maybe there's a way that you're offering us to sort of see this moment that's maybe a little different to going, well, something happened there. Actually, the something that happened there was itself the child of things starting to happen
things
everywhere.
That happened in the 100,000 level, right?
And now there might be a moment when that can come to the next scale. And maybe the
Yes.
UK has a role to play in that moment.
Exactly.
Okay. I feel like we ran over because we started late. I'm seeing energy for a couple more voices. Is that okay? If people need to head off, then please do. But we'll just hear from you briefly if we can, and try and hear all four of the voices that have got their hands up, and then we'll have a couple of closing kind of remarks. Does that feel all right? Yeah. Let's do that. So this gentleman first, and then Indra, would you mind passing your mic?
Can you hear me? I'm building a learning platform to teach people what amazing workplaces look like. And I'm very interested in how you measure the intangibles of a community of learners. Things like trust between users, diversity of a network, quality of communications. And so that was kind of part one. But from what's been discussed just now, if the hosting environment doesn't affect the viewing algorithm, how do you ensure or enforce psychological safety?
Let's keep hearing voices. I'll try and store a couple of these to re-prompt you, although I know your brain is much more effective than mine. Yeah. So Ian.
I'm interested in the level of digital inclusion in Taiwan compared to the UK, where digital exclusion, both access to and the cost of being online, is different. How does this vision reach people who are not comfortable in the online space?
Lovely. Anna.
When you were talking, you talked about dialing up the trust in the citizens, so that each time you dial it up and then you get it back. So I'm really interested in what you do to dial up the trust, what you actually do. And then the other thing is I sit on millions of resilience committees, and as we all know, when stuff happens, the first thing that goes is the power. How does that work?
So just for those, I think the mic died. So the end of the question was, yeah, the power ironically died, given that the question.
Power of the microphone.
Yeah. In resilience committees, what happened when like disaster of some sort, or when problems hit?
2 million people haven't got power in Houston right now.
Right.
And they didn't have it 3 months ago either.
So when the power goes down, what do you do? The literal power. And last voice into the room, my friend.
So thank you for all your insights so far, Audrey. I just got 2 questions. One is, I'd love to get your thoughts on the trade-off between kind of empowering citizens to govern themselves and overburdening them. And then the second one is, what do you think is the right balance between kind of the inclusion of public voices and relying on subject matter experts in the domain being kind of discussed about?
So I invite you to sort of take a breath, Audrey. You don't have to try and nail all of these. I think some of these are questions that are in the air, but I have a feeling you probably will nail all of them. So yeah.
I'll answer more generally. So of the mini public that we chose randomly, 450 people, 150 are actually subject matter experts. They are practitioners in online, like journalism and things like that. People who are affected directly by information integrity issues. And the other 300 are everyday persons and so on. So it always helps to have a intentional but healthy mix. Because the people who are not experts are nevertheless experts in their feelings. And mixed with experts are forced to talk in everyday language in a way that actually makes interdisciplinary conversation possible, right? So with intentional design, I think we can include both, and actually it's better if you include both in a mixture of setting. And that includes people who are not that digitally aware. In Taiwan, we have broadband as a human right. So no matter whether you're in the most remote island, where it can only be served by low Earth satellites or mid-Earth satellites, or whether you're on the tip of Yushan, 4,000 meters high, it doesn't matter. It's 14, 15 euros per month. You have unlimited data connection. That's a right. And if there are places where it makes no economic sense for telecoms to build there, then the other telecoms will subsidize that particular cost through Universal Service Fund and other infrastructure funds. And on top of that, I think it's important to, like in Taiwan, in 2019, we switched our curriculum so that we don't have media literacy or digital or data literacy anymore. We have media and data and digital competence, because literacy is when you consume and competence is when you contribute. So not just broadband as a human right, but also people in their 10 years old or 15 years old that can contribute then to help their grandparents and so on in a way that we help us. And the help us happens to, as part of civics class, to start very impactful citizen initiatives even before they turn 18. There was a very impactful one that bans the plastic straws from the bubble tea takeouts, because Taiwan, is the place of bubble tea, but we don't want to, destroy sea turtles or things like that. And so that's very important. And then they start learning that, they have the agency, they have the agenda setting power, they can get their grandparents really into the fray. And then they started another one that was also very impactful, is that according to studies, if high schoolers sleep for 1 or 2 hours more, then they actually retain more in their memory. And so they petitioned to start their classes not 7:30, but instead of like 8:45 or something like that in the AM, and they got it. And so, and so way before they turn 18, they already know that they're a citizen, even that they have no voting power. And so that is not overburdening anyone. It is just high schoolers wanting more sleep, right? So that's very natural for them to do. And so this kind of citizen initiatives, I think, is also a answer to the question of scale, because then people who are community organizers, they can then scale this deeply by one successful petition after another, by one presidential hackathon after another, by making sure that even if on the antisocial social media, the default algorithms just prefers those that are polarizing or things like that. If they go to the pro-social part of the social media, they get this binding feedback from the powers that be, right? So to many people in the power, if the public service, if the career public service tells them that this is more signal, less noise, that this is less risk, not more risk, then mostly the ministers are okay with power sharing if they have these two guarantees. So from the very beginning, our strategy has always been working with the credibly neutral partners to do capacity building with the public service. I always say that I'm the public servant to the public service. I work with the government, not for the government, not for any political parties. I'm working with these people, right? So at a kind of Lagrange point between the two gravitational centers of the state on one side and the movement on the other, like kind of feeling the gravitational pull but not orbiting anything. And so that is the place that the anonymous public service actually really identifies with. And then so if you can win the hearts and minds of those people, then they do the convincing to the ministers for you. They do the convincing of power sharing for you. So that's the kind of theoretical answer. And so finally, the resilience of communication structure, obviously very important. Investment in a more resilient electricity grid. The earthquake we literally have, as I mentioned, that we send those satellite receivers to the places that are impacted by earthquakes so we can just restore communication, not days, not hours, minutes after each disaster. And each of those things actually bring people together. There is a reason why the Ministry of Digital Affairs we set up a couple of years ago is in the Ministry of Transportation instead of economy or science or interior, because we're in charge of cybersecurity and AI and platform economy. Theoretically, we can choose any committee really, but we chose transportation because we want to show the resilience is the main thing. And this interoperability that we just talked about works just as, you know, it doesn't make sense for airports to only fly one single airplane, one single airline, and for each new airline to have to build their own airport. It just makes no sense. But that is what we're seeing in TikTok and social media and things like that. And so having this investment of how we call it, information superhighway is a very old word, right? As using the same budget as highway budget, it shows two things. First, interoperability is the state's business, it's the state's duty, and digital infrastructure is a matter of infrastructure. And second, next to actual highways, information superhighway is a fraction of the budget. And so it's actually very easy then to pass our budget. If you compare that not to the science budget, but to the infrastructure budget, this is really a fraction. So this is also a strategy that really worked for Taiwan.
And I don't think I've ever seen so many kind of moments in a room or felt them myself. So like I'm not going to try and wrap up in a dramatic fashion, but just to say like something coming up for me, like it made me think in those last answers, the lovely phrase Adrienne Marie Brown, the queer black thinker, uses in America, where she talks about we've had enough of mile-wide, inch-deep change that just bounces off. What we need now is inch-wide, mile-deep change that schisms the existing paradigm, and then we need to connect that up. And this seems to be sort of across what you're talking about. There is a validity in these shifts, and then your gift of these many reframes, this idea of you don't give trust, you don't get trust. The shift from protest to demonstration, I think, is one that's like a real, and for me, and this last little one of a shift from literacy to competence, I think, is just the way that makes you feel and think. So folks, there's more going on while we've got Audrey in London. We're doing an event with civil servants and politicians later today, and we've got a good audience for that. We have a dinner with a small group of key folk, so these conversations are genuinely live. We've been deliberately designing a visit that's sort of both what you might call outside game and inside game. And there's good reception, so there's energy here. I want you to know that. Tomorrow, lunchtime, this QR code that's poor Olivia's been trying desperately to make appear without bluing, well done, is a registration link for a gathering at Newspeak House over in Shoreditch. Audrey's going to drop in, but it's more going to be us coming to an opportunity to come together, meet other folk who want to start building, and we're going to be kind of building a bit of community from there. Is that right? Do you want to say any more on that, or have I got it?
Hello, I'm Olivia. I was lucky enough to meet John about 9 months ago and Audrey about 3 months ago, and it's safe to say it's changed the path of my life quite significantly. It's basically the Plurality London chapter launch, so if you're interested, inspired by all the ideas, it's a chance to get to talk about the concepts in the book in a little bit more detail, so we'll be doing that in the morning, but then we've also got a bunch of people who are doing plurality projects, so if you're thinking, I want to get involved, don't really know how, we've got people working on stuff, so you can come tomorrow afternoon and actually find out how you can join in and really take this moment and start doing.
Yay. And as I say, we have about the only 20 copies of Plurality that exist in the UK at the moment at the back of the room, so don't all hurt each other on the way to get them. And Audrey has signed them. We're going to have to rush Audrey off reasonably quickly, so I'm afraid this won't be a long delay space, but I hope meet one another, grab a cuppa, get the books if you can, otherwise order them, or it's open source online, so you can just read it online.
It's free of copyright, so call it your book. Yeah.
So you all wrote Plurality. Look at that. There's another reframe to end it with. But thank you for coming. Thank you to the live stream folk.
Thank you.